Welcome to the Pat White Show. Well, the chances are pretty good you're aware of the attack the Ukrainians did on the Russian Air Force, and probably one of the most unique and diabolical attacks I have ever seen. I always thought the Israelis were cool at doing attacks that were incredibly well done. They're standing in the shadows of the Ukrainians on this one. This was a really, really unique attack, but it's very, very concerning because this has a lot of ramifications, folks. All right, so the Ukrainians have been planning this for about a year and a half. It's called Operation Spiderweb. Now, here's what they did. They were able to acquire a trucking company. By no everyday trucking company, trucks move things through Europe the same way they move through the United States. That's what trucking companies do. So they acquire a trucking company. And then they build some things that look like compact houses, the kind that they erect on a small site. They almost look like those kind of carriers that you see, the ocean carriers come across, the storage carriers you see on the boats. Well, compact houses. Contract with a trucking company and say, hey guys, we need to take these compact houses to this city, that city, what have you. And they did. 4 cities in the interior and completely a long way away from Ukraine, over 1,000 miles away. These truck drivers, average everyday Russian truck drivers, got a job. Take these houses to these different cities. They were given instructions over the phone by people, where to go, what to do, what time, where to stop even in these various cities. And well, what happened after that was kind of interesting. Because when those unknowing Russian truck drivers, like every other truck driver, stops at a place, a gas station or whatever it is in a particular city, well, he says suddenly the tops of these fabricated houses come flipping off. And suddenly drones started popping out of the thing like they were mosquitoes. $500 drones jumping up in the air, taking off. And all of these trucks were positioned by Russian aviation locations, not main ones. Because the Russians have been moving their aircraft from the main bases to these outlying bases that don't have covered revetments. They got to set them open on the runways. Open planes, open runways, you can see them pretty easy. Now, how did the Ukrainians get the visuals on those Russian planes at those various airports? I don't know, but I can take a guess where they got the information where the planes were. But all these drones pop up on the top of these so-called prefabricated houses. Go flying, dropping bombs. They're first-person drones. And you can see the video, folks. You can see exactly what these drones were looking at, and they had specific places on the aircraft to hit. These are lynch points, very important points, fuel connector, wing connector points. And they went after the TU, the old Soviet turboprop or the twin pitch props. They went after those. Those are back in the 80s. They went after some of their modern stuff too, and some of the modern jets and the jet fighters and even recon planes. They took some of those out too. Right now, they estimate it took over around 30 to 40% of the entire Russian Air Force was taken out by these attacks. 171 drones were launched, and they all had bombs with them. Now, how do you say it? Well, how did the drones run? Turns out all the drones were set up on a cell phone network. And suddenly, when the trucks got to the right locations, the cell phone networks are operated, drones went up, all controlled by cell phones, which everybody has around the world. Cell phones knew where to fly. That's what they did. Massive amount of damage. Now, why am I concerned about this? Because, folks, this can happen anywhere, not just Russia. Let's say some bad guy wanted to do something here in the United States. Well, they could get trucks. We have flatbed trucks everywhere. Trucks are available anywhere. And they can have these storage facilities. They just put them on the back of the flatbed, drive them around, whatever it is. Pretty common in America. But what if you had some of these specially designed things that were specially set up and had drones? They weren't carrying bombs. Let's say they were carrying aerosol containers of a highly, highly dangerous poison. No smell, no taste. Flying drones, everybody sees drones. Okay, look at it, it's a drone. Ooh. All these drones flying around with these containers, hit a button, and spraying stuff into the air, poison gas. And it kills everybody that comes in contact with it who doesn't even realize what it is. They're just putting it in the air comes down to the ground, you breathe it, you die. Now, there's where drones could literally attack an entire country, not with bombs, with poison gas. That's something that ought to be worrying folks in the United States. You know, we're talking about getting a golden dome over our country to protect us from the missiles coming in. But the biggest thing to be concerned about, drones, because the warfare has turned, folks. It ain't necessarily guns, bullets, and missiles. Now it's drones. And Ukraine has proved that. They're using drones, and those are destroying the Russian military. Drones. $500 drones. Put 171 of them up. They can damage aircraft. I mean, we're talking big aircraft that can't be replaced because they were done back in the Cold War. You've taken out approximately a third of the entire Russian bombing fleet. Now you say, well, that's only a third. They got 2/3 left. No, they don't. Because 1/3 of it's probably in the hangar somewhere, broken, can't be fixed yet. So in effect, you have damaged and totally degraded the bomber force and even the AWACS force. They hit those planes too, and some of the jets. You see all the pictures here showing you all that. This is what's happening, and this was happening in Ukraine, planned it in Russia, and people didn't know what was going on, and suddenly bombs came down from drones. But the U.S., it wouldn't have to be drones. It could be drones flying around dispensing poison gas, and everybody who breathes it, dead on the spot. Just telling you what might be something to think about what's going on. It's not pretty, and I apologize for saying some of this stuff. But you better wake up, America, because the war has changed. The rules of war have changed. And the products used in war have really changed. And now we're getting small, we're getting tiny, and we're getting very precise. And it ain't a bomb. It's someone sitting there with their controller that they've been using since they were a kid. That's how the world has changed. And we better be ready for what could happen. Well, a new battle has started between the Secretary of States of 19 blue states in America against an executive order the president wrote back in March. That executive order essentially says this: if you're going to vote in federal elections in the United States of America, you must be a citizen. Simple as that. Those are the rules, folks. Constitution says if you're a citizen, you get to vote in federal elections. If you're not a citizen, you don't. So you've got to prove the fact that you are a citizen and you have the right to vote. Voter ID is pretty much what it's called. Well, the Secretary of States of 19 blue states have said, no, we don't like that because the Constitution says we, the states, have the right to run our elections the way we want to run our elections. And if we don't want to have people having voter ID or having to prove they're citizens to vote, that's our call. That's not the call of the president. That's going beyond what the Constitution allows. Now, that's some very good points when you think about it. Here you have states saying, hey, the Constitution says each state runs its own election. The president is saying, fine, run the election the way you want, but if you're going to vote in a federal election, you've got to be a citizen. Simple as that. Now, those other blue states are saying, well, not everybody can prove that, especially married women. Got to have a birth certificate, a marriage license, prove what they were, who they are. They're a citizen. Well, you know what? A lot of that has been proven to be not a big problem, and people have solved that pretty easily. But the lawsuits continue. Now, there's actually 3 lawsuits out there. In one particular lawsuit, 2 states, Oregon and Washington State, most of their elections, folks, are done as mail-in ballots. You don't really see the poll places open per se like you do here in Indiana or other states. Everything's done by mail-in ballots. They say it's easier, gets things done. But the one thing the president says in his executive order, he says, hey, you can't count ballots after election day is over. You count them on that date. What you got, you count. That's the way the election ends. You can't count them days afterward. Well, the other states are saying, well, yeah, we can count them as long as they're postmarked on the day of the election at the latest. And they're saying, that's what we want to be able to do. And if we have to wait till after the election to count all the ballots that came in, we should have that right because they're postmarked properly. All right, so that's the gist of the lawsuit going on. Now, turns out in Congress, there's a bill that's going through Congress. It's passed the House. It's called the SAVE Act. And the SAVE Act essentially says what the president is trying to do. You've got to be a citizen and prove it to vote in federal elections. Like I said, it passed the House of Representatives. In the Senate, it doesn't look like it's going to pass. And I'd be surprised if it did. So right now, the president's saying, I'm doing this by executive order. And the Justice Department is saying, hey, president has certain capabilities, especially involving federal elections. Now, where's this going to end up? Well, right now it's in district courts, and it's probably going to be appealed to the United States Supreme Court, as are many other bills. Because I can tell you this, there have been more suits against this president than any president in recent times. I mean, going back a long way. Lawsuits filed against Donald Trump and his administration have been higher than any other administration combined. You could add up all the previous administrations going back to who knows when, FDR if you want to. Add them all up together and see how many there are. Wouldn't be near as many as already been filed against Trump. Now, the left says, well, it's because he's the most illegal president ever. Everything he does is illegal. Everything is wrong. We're going to sue over everything. Well, that's the way things work in America. Because if that's all you have left is to sue, that's all you have left to sue. And eventually, a lot of this is going to end up in the Supreme Court. How it's going to come out, how it's going to work out, no one knows. But I can tell you this. Should American citizens be American citizens for the right to vote? Or should non-citizens, where we have a lot of them today, be taking part in federal elections? Should that be allowed? That's the gist of the story, folks. We'll see what happens with that as the courts continue and the lawsuits follow it. Let's see what happens. I don't know if you've been following the news lately, but if you have, you've probably seen footage of what's going on out in California, where ICE and the Border Patrol people are trying to round up illegals in the state of California and deport them. That's what's supposed to be done. You're here illegally, you could be deported. Well, apparently the Mexican population in California, of which is the majority, by the way, are putting up a fight, and I mean a real fight. And they're, well, for lack of a better term, they're interfering with law enforcement to the point of almost rioting in the streets of California. So, what did they do about it? Well, President Trump did the same thing that John F. Kennedy did back in 1963, and I'll tell you what he did in a moment. Because what President Trump did was he sent out an order sending in the California National Guard. He activated them. The president could do that with an executive order. Well, wouldn't you know it, but Adam Schiff, senator from California, sent out this message. The Trump administration is calling on the California National Guard without authorization of the governor is unprecedented. No, it's not. And I'll tell you why it was in a moment. This action is designed to inflame tensions, sow chaos, and escalate the situation, so says Adam Schiff. Then he goes on to say, if the guard is needed to restore peace, the governor will ask for it. But continuing down this path will erode trust in the National Guard and set a dangerous precedent for unilateral misuse of the guard across the country. All right, Adam Schiff. Once again, you prove you don't know what you're talking about. The reason I say that was because back in 1963, the JFK, President of the United States, issued an executive order himself. It's Executive Order number 11111. And what it did, it activated the Alabama National Guard. Now, why did he deactivate the Alabama National Guard? Because the governor of Alabama back then was a gentleman by the name of George Wallace. George Wallace said, we ain't allowing nobody into the University of Alabama who happens to be black. because his motto was segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. And he was not going to let any black persons in the University of Alabama. And frankly, the University of Alabama had been keeping blacks out for years. But now we had a case where Vivian Malone and James Wood, you might remember those names, filed to get in, did all the paperwork, and we're going to go to college at the University of Alabama. George Wallace decided he's going to stand in the way, and they get into a fight. Now, Bobby Kennedy was the secretary or the attorney general at the time in the Kennedy administration. He talked to Wallace and said, "Hey, you get out of the way." Wallace says, "Ain't going to do it. Ain't going to do it." So JFK said, "Okay, I'm sending in the National Guard." So yes, it has been done before. It has been done. JFK did it. A Democrat did it to another Democrat. Okay, Adam Schiff, keep this in mind. A Democrat, John F. Kennedy, did it to a Democrat, George Wallace. So here you have Trump, a Republican, doing it to Gavin Newsom, who's a Democrat. And then for Schiff to say, this is unprecedented. No, it's not. And frankly, if the National Guard has to protect law enforcement, prevent something bad from happening, because the rioting going on in Mexico, the people don't want to leave. They're here illegally, and they're going to fight like crazy to make sure they don't have to leave. That's where we are, America. People who've broken the law, we want to round up, get out of our country, and say you're out. And that's what America wants. They're being, the war is starting. Take a look at the streets. Take a look at what's going on. And the people are running around in the streets, carrying around the Mexican flag like this is the banner they're willing to die for. You're in the United States of America, not Mexico. But that's what they're fighting for. Mexico, not America. That's what's going on. So yes, the president did activate the California National Guard. I think it's about 2,000 troops, and sent them into California to protect law enforcement so that it doesn't turn into a mass riot and somebody gets hurt. I pray that no one gets hurt. Down at the University of Alabama in 1963, George Wallace stepped aside and let the two people enter and register. That was 1963. It ended peacefully. The National Guard stayed on the post on the University of Alabama for a while, for fear that the Ku Klux Klan was going to get involved, and they almost did. Fortunately, they didn't. We're not dealing with the Klan in Southern California now. We're dealing with the Mexican Americans who claim that California belongs to them, apparently, and they don't want to leave it, regardless of what America wants. Just what's going on, just something you should know. Why the National Guard was activated, and is there precedence? Yes, there is. And now you know. Well, as you know, recently college athletes could make these deals called NIL deals, name, image, and likeness, with various companies to get compensated. And that was sort of the deal that was working in the Division I on these NIL deals. Well, now a judge in California by the name of Claudia Wilkin, she has finally settled a big-time NCAA lawsuit, actually 3 federal lawsuits, and she has approved colleges to be able to directly pay athletes. You heard me right. Division I, a California judge has said, okay, I'm going to sign off on the deal. Colleges will be able to directly pay their athletes. So if you've got an athlete in your family who's going to go to a Division I school, he can sit down there and negotiate how much money he's going to be paid to work and to perform at that particular college which he is planning on attending. Now, they've got it set up, they've got a roster set up that limits the number of players that could be paid. In football, it's 105 players. In basketball, it's 15 players. That's for men's. And for baseball, it's 34 players. Now, I don't know about the women's. I'm just telling you the men's stuff. So right now, a judge says, colleges, you can officially start paying July the 1st. You can start paying your athletes money to perform at your college under football, baseball, or basketball. Now, they've set a limit, and there's a commission they put together that says, okay, a commission is going to control, it's called the College Sports Commission, and it will determine what schools are paying as long as nobody beats the cap. And right now, the cap is $6.5 million. Now, that's the current cap that colleges can pay. So you got to say to your college, okay, I got $20-some million I can pay my athletes. And that's your total amount of money that you can pass out. Some maybe get more, some maybe get less. The kids that are going to be left out are probably the walk-ons, partial scholarships. Those kind of kids are probably not going to see any coinage coming their way. But the big-time athletes, and now the kids can walk out from high school, go to a college and see, how much are you going to pay me? It's not about the coach. It's not about having a nice facilities, great weight room, fabulous stadium, great weather. It's about none of those. It's about how much you could pay these kids to play football, baseball, or basketball at a Division I school. So the judges approved it, friends. So now, guess what? College athletes are going to be paid, well, kind of like pro athletes are. So does that mean that college football is now professional college football? Because the players are being compensated for their ability to perform on the field. And now they've also said, okay, we're going to set aside a certain amount of money, and the amount of money they're going to set aside is in billions of dollars. I think it's $2.8 billion to pay all the athletes who didn't get NIL deals in the past. So these are old athletes that no longer stay in school, but they're saying, hey, we never got an NIL deal. We never got any of the stuff. We want to be compensated because we worked for the school at that time. So now they're going to shell out $2.8 billion to those athletes who never had the NIL deals, but that's keeping them from suing to say, hey, we want part of this deal. So everybody's going to get paid. And now schools are going to be paying your son or daughter, well, possibly daughter, to perform. Question is how much? And right now, at $26.5 million, don't know who's going to get what, but now you know. It has now been officially approved by a judge in California, canceling out 3 federal antitrust lawsuits and a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on. But now the NCAA will be able to pay athletes in baseball, football, and basketball. Boy, isn't that just wonderful? And especially if the kid doesn't make it to the NFL, Major League Baseball, or the NBA, he's already got himself a financial ticket to ride. Not too bad for just throwing a ball, catching a ball, or hitting a ball. Not too bad, folks. Not too bad. A few episodes back, I talked to you about the fact that magnetic north on the Earth is moving. And it's been moving every year for, well, a number of years. It's getting closer to the top of the North Pole, but it is moving. And the question is, why is magnetic north moving? Well, that's because what's inside the Earth is starting to move around and rumble. Now, if you decide you want to dig a great big giant hole into the center of the Earth and hope to get to the other side of China, well, it ain't going to work out quite that way. Because you see, the farther you get down into the Earth, it's not going to get colder, it's going to get hotter. As a matter of fact, it's going to get a lot hotter because inside of the Earth is magma. I mean, it's molten stuff. And as a result, sometimes that magma decides it's going to come out of the ground, and you see what happens. Everybody remembers what happened back in 1980 when Mount St. Helens decided to, well, erupt, and it did. Killed a lot of people. And you go over to Hawaii, and you got Kilauea over there, that particular volcano. But now we've recently had another volcano in Italy pop its top. And suddenly things are happening all around the world. Volcanic activity seems to be happening everywhere because, well, the Earth is shifting on many different fronts. And folks, that could be serious if you think about it. We've had a magnitude of 5.7 earthquake off the coast of Panama. That's pretty unusual. Even had 33 earthquakes in the Camp Pellegrini in Italy, which is the big super volcano over in Italy. 33 earthquakes, magnitude around 3.3. Not terribly big, but rumblings going on. And over in Idaho, Idaho, 34 tremors have now been recorded, the largest of which is 3.2. And then you're getting into Yellowstone National Park. And you know what goes on there? But they figured out that thing is sitting under a big, giant clump, huge thing of magma under the ground. Could that blow sometime? Nobody's really sure. Puerto Rico is suffering earthquakes, 3.6, and a 5.0 quake hit in the Hawke's Bay in New Zealand. And that's a little bit unusual for that area. And here's the latest one, a 3.3 magnitude quake struck Nellis Air Force Base out there in Las Vegas. Now, here's something you need to understand. With magnetic north moving, that means what's inside the Earth is starting to move. Our poles are starting to shift. And there's a thing called geomagnetic excursion. And basically, that's another name for a pole shift. That's what's going on. Now, we've got some mountains you got to start worrying about. Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, mention that again, and Mount Adams. Those are all in the state of Washington. Then you got the Three Sisters, the Axial Seamount, and Crater Lake in Oregon. Now, these were all originally volcanoes. Could they be getting to rock and roll and rumble? Well, you've seen the video of ground actually shifting, moving, and it's doing that. So there's something going on inside the Earth that could lead to something really big blowing up. Well, that's certainly a possibility because now scientists are saying, hey, we could see a big earthquake coming up soon. We just don't know where it's going to happen because you don't know what's going on in the ground and which the weakest spot and which is the place the magma wants to go to, and all because all the liquid inside the center of the Earth is moving. Hence, it's moving our North Pole. And when you start moving the North Pole around, a lot of things happen, especially anybody who flies airplanes. You know, what is magnetic north is not necessarily real north. Some corrections have to be made. That does happen. So what you need to understand is what's going on under the ground right now. Something's going on. I can't tell you when, I can't tell you where, and I can't tell you which mountain or which volcano is going to explode. But mark my words, something is rumbling under the ground, and something could erupt. It could be out in the middle of the ocean. Could be a big crater out there that goes, then you got a potential for a tsunami coming in. There's a lot of ways that things could play out. And considering what happened in Mount St. Helens in 1980, remember, folks, those are volcanoes. They can erupt again. And I'm talking about Mount Rainier and Mount Adams. Hey, maybe even Mount Baker, for crying out loud. Heaven only knows. Could happen. When and where, nobody knows. But when it does, be prepared, folks, because I think this time it could be pretty doggone big. Just my opinion, but based on everything I'm seeing and reading, something is about to go. We just don't know when, and we just don't know where. Well, if you follow any news going on in this town, the latest thing that's being talked about is an incident that happened at a place called Pike's Pub. It's a bar that I've never been to and frankly don't want to go to. It involved, someone being intoxicated, probably more than one person being intoxicated, and a battle that broke out at Pike's Pub where supposedly the members of the Outlaw Club, which we've had some problems with in Fort Wayne for a number of years, Outlaw Motorcycle Club, and a gentleman by the name of James Simmons, who happens to be a black man, trying to leave the bar. Fracas broke out, and they said a fight, a brawl, if you will, started. And it was taken by somebody on phone. Everybody's got a camera on their phone nowadays, and so somebody was shooting the video. Well, that video basically went viral. When it goes viral, it's seen by everybody everywhere. And, of course, that turns up a big issue going on in the government. And, of course, when you get those kind of things going on, a lot of people start talking, and people start making accusations left and right. Well, what happened was they had a big meeting, if you will, not a meeting, but a show that was put on in front of the Allen County Courthouse. And the folks representing Mr. Simmons, his group, a pastor by the name of Carlton Lynch. Carlton Lynch is currently in Benton Harbor, Michigan. He'd been in jail, or not in jail, but he had been charged himself with some felonies. Jury said not guilty. Fine, that's the way it works. Jury says you're not guilty, you're not guilty. So Pastor Carlton Lynch really knows his way around the courtroom a little bit. But he stood up there in front of the microphones, along with the mayor and the sheriff and the county prosecutor, and even members of the FBI saying, we've got to get into this situation that happened. This is terrible. People have been called racial names, racial slurs, and turning this into what amounts to is a racial situation involving the group, the Cowboys, or the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. Now, some years ago, there was a problem with the Outlaw Motorcycles Club, and I think they had to shut down a building that they occupied. That goes back a number of administrations earlier. But the Pastor Carlton Lynch wants the pub, the Pike's Pub, to be shut down immediately and indefinitely. Well, I'm not sure he can do that, or that can even be required, unless they break any particular laws through the state of Indiana involving what's allowed. And by the way, places have been shut down, and they can be shut down by the state. Pull their liquor license. Pull your liquor license, you're not going to operate. Understand that. But turning this into a potential racial war is not the smartest thing we see. And frankly, the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, if they were hurling racial slurs, and it's certainly a possibility, and if people got it on their phones that they taped at the event, there it is. Everybody to see. But the FBI has now been brought in, as this is a federal case. Well, that makes it a little bit muddy, folks, just a little bit muddy. How this is going to turn out, right now the sheriff of Allen County says we're going to find the people responsible and we're going to have charges, and that's the way the system works. The prosecutor says we're going to prosecute people who are doing this. That's the way the prosecution works. But you have to let it all play out. But in the meantime, turning this into a big giant racial war, potential racial war, in the city of Fort Wayne, don't be blaming everybody in Fort Wayne. Yes, you've got the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, and we've had some problems with them in the past. But don't be blaming the entire city. I'm sure that most people don't even know what Pike's Pub is and wouldn't attend if they did. Is this an isolated incident? Probably so. But blowing it up into a national incident and put it on national TV and get the clicks on their computer, that inflames some things that shouldn't be inflamed. And that's done for the wrong purposes. So I'm just putting it out there saying, let the justice system work, let the sheriff work, let the prosecutor work, let those things be done. But don't turn this into a battle of races, because it wasn't set up that way. And in this case, if a particular group of people did some really bad stuff, then they should be prosecuted. Let's wait and see how this plays out before anybody does anything or accuses an entire city of being something they are not. Just saying, my opinion, that's the way I see it. Well, what do you say we talk about something that most people don't even mention or discuss, but it's something you might find interesting? Now, I want to show you a couple of pictures. These are a couple of artist drawings. They are not real pictures per se, but they are projections of something that might interest you. All right. These are pictures taken of Earth, Mother Earth, where you and I live, and it's taken from a distance, sort of like halfway between the Earth and the Moon. And if you were on a spaceship and you want to take a picture of Earth while you're flying to the moon, here is what you would see in different times. The first time is going to be in 1965. The second picture, 2025. 60 years difference, okay? 60 years. All right, so you ready for this? Here is what the Earth will look like, would have looked like, and did look like back in 1965. And here it is. See how those little blips, those little yellow colored things that you see? Those are satellites. That is how many satellites that were circling the Earth back in 1965. Not many, right? Well, satellite technology and rocket technology, now that didn't exist like it does today, so there wasn't much up there. That was 1965. Now let's move ahead to 2025, 60 years later. Let's see what Mother Earth looks like from space now. Take a look at this. Yeah, folks, that's the Earth. That's the markings of how many satellites are in orbit around this planet. And you're going, what? You can't see the planet. Well, actually, you can because these are all markings or satellites that exist. But that goes to show you what's going on outside in the atmosphere, the ionosphere, out in space, outside of Earth. All those satellites, some are in low orbit, some are in medium orbit, some are in high orbit. We've got telephone satellites, we've got broadcast satellites, we've got weather satellites, we got spy satellites. Well, Elon Musk has got his Starlink satellites, a whole bunch of those. You see them in the sky. Satellites are everywhere. And here's the problem that we're hearing down on Earth. People who launch rockets into space, or maybe you want to go to the moon or go to Mars or wherever you're going to go, when they want to launch a satellite, they got to find the right hole they can get through where there is an opening out where they can get out into space. That's right, there's so much junk in space, and many satellites were dead. They don't function anymore. They've lived their life. They're just orbiting out there in the middle of space. Space junk. Well, that's what's existing, folks, in our planet. Now you understand what's going on outside of Earth. Now, is that affecting what happens in the sunlight hitting the Earth? Well, probably not, because they're like the satellites. They're not all that big. They're just out there orbiting. But if you're going to launch a rocket into space from Earth into space, you got to figure out where every satellite is to make sure when you're setting that rocket up, it's not bouncing off other satellites. Because to do that would create a bad problem. Imagine if you had a weather satellite and you launched a rocket and the rocket hits the weather satellite and you suddenly can't see the weather in the United States. That'd be a bad plan. Or a spy satellite like a keyhole or some of those kind of things. So here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. We have so much space junk out there. Imagine if someone on another planet came in to visit and they're going to go, what in the heck is that surrounding Earth? It's all of our satellites. That's what we're living with, folks. Now you understand. What was in 65 is not anymore in 2025. It's called satellites. Modern technology. And modern technology has created a covering, if you will, around our planet. And that covering is nothing more than a batch of monstrous number of satellites. Is it getting better? No. Is it getting worse? Probably yes. And now you understand the problem that exists if you want to launch a rocket into space. Well, in the world of celebrities, a couple of celebrities are going at it like it's a cat fight. And the two are Simone Biles, probably one of the finest gymnasts I think I have ever seen. And you probably agree if you've seen her perform too. She's an Olympic gymnast, one of the best you've ever seen. And I believe she's married to a football player. But anyway, so the lady's name is Simone Biles. She is the top of the notch as far as athletics go and gymnastics. And then there's another lady. Her name is Riley Gaines. Riley Gaines is, she was a swimmer. And she got beat in a big-time race because a man saying that he was a woman, identifying as a woman, beat her. And she's been fighting this ever since, saying that it shouldn't happen. I think the man's name was Leah Thomas. And apparently those medals are all going to be revoked eventually, and she's going to get the medal she deserves. But that's another story all to itself. Bigger story is that there was Riley Gaines talking about a high school softball team in Minnesota, 4A softball team, and they won the state championship with a pitcher who was, a male, saying that he was a female. And they ended up winning the championship, to which Riley Gaines says this isn't right. And this is wrong. Shouldn't be doing that. And she's been campaigning on that particular concept for, a very long time. She, like the vast majority of Americans, believe that you got X chromosomes, Y chromosomes. Whatever belonged to men, belonged to men. Whatever belonged to women, belonged to women. That's the way it should be. A man's a man and a woman's a woman. And men shouldn't be playing with women because they have an obvious advantage that women don't have. So Riley's been going on about this softball team. Well, then Ms. Biles sends out a tweet, we call it, maybe an X, a text post, if you will, on the X platform saying, hey, you should be joining this transsexual. You should be supporting this transsexual. You should be finding another way for them to compete. You should be backing them up. Well, then the fight was on. And they have been throwing punches back at each other, verbal punches back and forth. Been going on for a while. The problem is it went public. And with something like this, of two high-profile ladies, one is a gymnast and the other is a swimmer, those go big time and everybody's going to know about it. You're going to see it on the news. You're going to hear it everywhere else. But the problem is with Miss Biles, she's got a contract with an apparel company. And that apparel company is under a lot of pressure right now. That apparel company may, in fact, have to drop Miss Biles as, well, one of their spokespeople, just like it happened to Angel Reese. She apparently was dropped by Nike because of some of the things she said involving Caitlin Clark. When you get into these catfights, ladies and gentlemen, yes, you start hurling insults. You can see them. All the insults they're hurling back and forth. They're certainly doing it. But does it result in anything good happening? Not for either of them. But America, apparently, based on what I'm seeing, America is starting to say, hey, Riley's right. Simone, you're wrong. And we're arguing over something that is so minuscule and so small. Why are we turning this into a major league situation? Not good, folks. Not good at all. How will this end up? Will they bury the hatchet? I'm not sure. Someone may literally try to bury a hatchet, but not in the way you think. Not a good situation. Let's hope this thing gets resolved in one way, shape, or form, because it doesn't look good for either of these ladies, whether it's Simone Biles or whether it's Riley Gaines. Each has a lot to lose. And frankly, in this one, there may be no winner because things don't really work out that way in the real world.